everybody, it's the Lawn Gnome, and welcome to your May 2020 episode of Sunday Sit Down, the show where anything goes and nothing gets left behind. As always, I am Steve, and I am so excited to join you all today because I have a very, very special topic to discuss today. I mean, one of the things that I love so much about Sunday Sit Downs is the fact that there are some days where I bring on a guest to talk about something that I truly love and am passionate about. But I also want to use this as a platform to bring a couple of ideas to the table that I personally know are important, but I may not have that knowledge. And for me, it's about not just having a very good conversation with a good YouTuber, but it's also to make myself a little bit more aware of something that has only been exposed to me a little bit, and I'm always willing to learn. And the topic that we're going to be talking about today is mental health, specifically getting an understanding of the fact that as a YouTuber, what role does it play? And I'm sure that because of the conversation, which I know is going to be a very good one, I can feel it, we are definitely going to probably tackle a little bit more than just that. And also, we've all been dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. Some of us are still in lockdown mode, like myself, but some of us are starting to get back out into the world as the country is starting to reopen. And even though some people are excited to, quote unquote, get a little bit more of their freedom back, there are still some people that are on a little bit of shaky ground. And also, it happens to be Mental Health Awareness Month. So I had no idea that that was actually happening. So I was like, wow, this couldn't be more perfect. And what could be more perfect than that is the guest that I have today. She is someone who I've been following for about a year. And what I really appreciate about her channel is not only is she a very good booktuber who brings up a whole bunch of books that you don't really see on the typical booktuber's channel, she's also trying to bring a little bit more of what she's going to be doing for a living and how she's going to rope it in with her channel. And I'm really excited to have Tiffany from Hierarchy Reads to join me today. Tiffany, good morning, and thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and as I said, you are going into a profession that deals with mental health situations, so I couldn't have asked for a better person to join me for this conversation because, like I said earlier, I'm really hoping to learn a lot today.
Well, thank you.
All right, so first of all, let me just ask you off topic, how's everything been going with you amidst the pandemic? I like to ask that to a lot of people these days.
Yeah, things have been going pretty well for me. You know, of course, much like most people, I'd like to get out in the world a little bit more and interact. I do miss some of my friends and everything, but I've been quite fortunate. I haven't really been troubled too much by things, be it, financially or, with mental health. So I'm fortunate. I can't complain too much. And yourself?
Yes, like I say to a lot of people when everyone asks me how I'm doing, I say I'm still healthy and I'm still employed. So that's one of the few things that has definitely been one of my saving graces. But sometimes, even though I will say I have never been bored during these last couple of months, especially, as people who know me, they know what I like to do. I like to watch movies, listen to music. So I've definitely been just fine on that side. I will not deny the fact that one of the few things that has really been getting to me is the fact that I actually haven't gone to see my parents, and I truly, truly miss them, especially the fact that it was Mother's Day last weekend, and even though my wife and I did have a little Zoom session with both of our mothers, so the four of us had a nice little conversation, my wife and I were definitely looking at each other and say we really wish that we were able to actually, go see our mothers, give them the Mother's Day cards, give them a hug, just see how everything's been going. So I've already said to people, even though I have friends that are excited to do things with me and other things that I know are on the horizon when everything is opened up and we're allowed to do these things, I say to people the first thing I want to do is I just want to go visit my parents. That's the God's honest truth because I truly, truly miss them. But everything else has been just fine. Thank goodness.
That's good.
Yeah, so as always, I have 7 questions and I'm really excited to ask these to you. just before we start that again, I'm sorry for putting this off again. I think the viewers would want to get to a little bit more of an understanding of exactly the field that you're going to be going into. I keep forgetting because I always mix up psychology and psychiatry, so I didn't want to say anything that was wrong. So I would, for my own self and for everybody else, please elaborate a little bit more of the field that you're going into.
Yes, of course. And to be fair, most people get that confused. In fact, I didn't even really know the correct terminology for what I wanted to do until about 2 years ago. So you're not alone. But I am currently a master's student in the area of clinical psychology. So what that means is that I focus more on the clinical side of things as opposed to the more research side of things. So I'm more looking into, being a therapist for people going forward. I'm about a year into the program. I have about a year left.
Look, I'm hoping that, your passion will lead to an excellent career for you, because from what I have seen in regards to the conversations that we have had, I definitely see that this is something that is very much a good thing for yourself. And like I said, I hope it just takes you far. That's what I want to see for everybody. So the first question that we're going to talk about is, I always like to begin at the beginning, and we just obviously talked about what you're going to be doing, but let's get a little bit more of an understanding of when the topic of mental health actually became something that interested you in regards to a career path.
Okay, yeah. So I think I should preface with the fact that I've always been kind of psychologically minded, even before I really knew what that meant. I've always been kind of internalized, always kind of observed my surroundings and thought to myself, I wonder why that person is doing that, or I wonder why they tend to think this way. But when it really solidified for me was my senior year in high school. I took an AP psychology course, and before then I thought I was going to go into law. I loved law. But that one course, I think I had maybe 3 weeks in the class, and I just knew, it wasn't that I wanted to do it, that I had to do this. But it's so cliche, but it really was my calling. I was learning about all these theories and these applications of theories that were truly, explaining the world around me and explaining things that I couldn't understand before and offering solutions. And so I wanted to be a part of that, not only for me in my life, but I wanted to also be a part of offering that for other people in their lives.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, it's also nice to know that you're one of the fortunate few that actually, quote unquote, finds their calling, because, that's something that takes a while for some people. I mean, when I was in college, I was definitely going towards the business side of things. I was a marketing major, and one of the few things that I really wanted to do was I wanted to go into advertising, because as someone who is a pop culture fan, one of the things that I actually will say that I also really loved were commercials. There's so much work that goes into making a standout commercial, just like making a blockbuster movie. I mean, I don't even know if anyone even knows, especially people from the younger generations, that there actually was an award ceremony for best commercials. It's called the Clio Awards. And at one point in time, it was actually televised.
Ooh.
That was one of the first times I actually ever saw the Got Milk campaign. That was like a classic campaign, and it wasn't really being televised on television. But after the Clio Awards were televised, I started noticing those commercials on television a lot more. I thought that was so interesting. But one of the other things that does happen to a lot of people is when you are officially going down that career path after you've officially graduated, you suddenly realize that the competition is very tough, and you don't realize just how much harder it can possibly be. But also, I also have to take into account that when I was looking for a job, it was 2003, and that was when the market was in a really bad place. But it actually took me a little bit of time. I mean, I was in a completely different career for 8 years until I realized I need to do something better, because I just wasn't as good as I thought I was in this specific field. So I went back to school. I got my master's degree in information technologies, particularly database management. And people will say that it's like one of the most boring things in the world, because it's basically just organizing data. But funny enough, one of the things that I like to do is organize things. I mean, look behind me. there's a method to this madness that you see behind me. Things are organized in a very interesting way. And just like having things that belong to you, you just put them all out on the floor and say, okay, I'm going to put these in alphabetical order. I'm going to put these in chronological order, or I'm going to just put these in book series like author orders, or it's just fun to me. And quite frankly, I do enjoy what I do, but it's also because of the fact that I also was blessed to just have people in my office space that I get along with. And they say, if you like what you do, if you like where you work and you like who you work with, you'll never work a day in your life. We'll move on to the second question, and that obviously will pertain to you being a booktuber and someone who's going into the areas that you're going into for work. And that is, what is the first book that you read that actually showed mental health playing a major role in the plot? And did it also play a role in your overall curiosity, and did it motivate you furthering your path down your current career path?
This one's kind of tough for me because even though I'm a reader and I'm a booktuber, somehow I don't remember many of the books that I read earlier on in life. But I think that my answer to that would be the book, The Island of the Blue Dolphins. I think the author is Scott Odell, but I'm not sure. And to be honest, I'm not even really entirely sure what the exact plot was. But what I do remember is primarily it's about a young woman who she's stuck on this island and she's there alone and she has to survive. And it's kind of like her survival story of being on this island, but not just her physical survival, but also how she copes with that and how she kind of psychologically survives that. And so even though, psychology wasn't directly talked about or brought up in that book, from what I remember, I remember being particularly interested in kind of the coping part of that and how we draw resilience within ourselves. Of course, back then I didn't know it was called resilience, but I've always been interested in kind of like survivor stories and, people kind of overcoming the odds and getting through, difficult events.
Yeah, and that whole topic really can be very broad. I mean, it could be anything from being stranded on a desert island like the Red Badge of Courage or anything like that to that extent. What's actually kind of interesting is I actually know that there was a book that I read because my whole history of reading is very interesting. Like, I really wasn't a big fan of reading when I was younger, and I think it was really just because of the fact that I never really found my niche. But obviously, one of the books that gets so many people into reading these days was Harry Potter, and then I realized, fantasy is definitely where I can go. And I actually was fortunate, and I had already read these specific books, but I actually took a J.R.R. Tolkien literature class in my college for like a winter break thing, just to get some extra credits. And we actually had a whole discussion about the character Gollum, because according to the professor, Gollum was actually one of the first characters in literature to actually feature a character with a mental health issue, because he had a split personality. And we have to remember the fact that even though we have all of these editions of copyrights, of publishing dates of Lord of the Rings, Lord of the Rings was actually being written in like the late 1800s, early 1900s. So that book is old. And I just found that whole idea very interesting. Like, when I read a fantasy book, for fantasy readers and sci-fi readers, we read these books to get lost, but we never, at least at first, don't realize how much of reality is actually put into the words on that page. So the fact that this specific character was showing this mental health sign, whether it was, whether people call it like schizophrenia or split personality disorder, it's just, it brought a whole new dimension to me in regards to the writing of the book and the creation of said character. So I found that very interesting.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it seems to me like I haven't really read much fantasy, but it seems to me that sometimes the most appealing parts of the fantasy are actually the more humanistic parts, that it's still relatable even in that fantasy.
I will harp on that by saying that one of the things that people really love in a story is when you take a look at the hero and the villain, people love it when it's not black and white. People love stories with the shades of gray. And you know, if you want to go into a little bit more fantasy drive, that's why a lot of people relate with Batman, because Batman is one of those people that is dealing with so much because of the fact that he lost his parents when he was a kid, and he sees these other villains that are suffering. And this crazy thing about a lot of these villains that he faces is that some of them were former brilliant scientists, and to see brilliant minds start to break like that, and how even though he knows he's not entirely stable, he knows that he can help them. That's why he wants to make sure that they go to the asylum and not kill them right there on the spot, because he believes that there is still good in others and that people can be healed. So I find that so interesting too, and that's why a lot of people relate to that character.
Yeah, I didn't know that about the Batman storyline. So
Yeah, there's a lot of his rogues gallery. Like, I'll give you some examples. The character Mr. Freeze, he's a cryogenicist. Jervis Tetch, whose alias is called the Mad Hatter, he's a neuroscientist. So it's very interesting because I always was a Batman fan ever since I was a little kid. I watched the 1966 Adam West show, which was one of my favorite things when I was a little kid. But when I got older and started actually reading the source material and learning a lot more about these villainous characters, I was like, this is so interesting. And even on other things like in the world of X-Men, Magneto, when you see the relationship between him and Professor Xavier, they don't really hate each other, because Charles Xavier knows that Magneto has all of this anger because he's a Holocaust survivor. He saw the true brutality and the cruelness of humans taking their wrath out on other humans. And he believed that because he was still different from everybody else, even though he may not look different, he still believed that the human race was never going to learn, and that these people still need to understand that, hate is not a good thing. But he went in a very different direction. He didn't want to find that middle ground. He just wanted the bad element wiped away. It's just, that's why comic books and books in general, I like the fact that there's a lot more of mental health that is being shown in these books now, because these are real life situations. People are now being a lot more aware of mental health, because when I was young, when I would go places, we would actually pass a mental health facility. And I still remember this one time when I asked my mother what that building was, and she told me what it was and what goes on in there. And I always said to myself, somewhere in the back of my mind, and I'm truly not making this up, it was just the feeling that I got about that building, it just confused me. Because I said to myself, this feels to me like it's not a place where people go for help. To me, it feels just like a fancy prison. And I felt at that time that we really were just taking these people that have these problems, and we're just keeping them away from society, and we're not really doing anything to try and help them grow and be a part, make them feel that they belong.
yeah, I mean, and I'm not exactly sure like the context in your example, but I mean, there's definitely, especially in the last 30, 40 years, it's definitely been a drive to really understand more the roots of mental health or mental illness, and normalizing a lot of it, and seeing that it's not something that, we should just ignore and put people aside because it's inconvenience. And these are people and they matter just as much as everybody. And so really there's been a move to kind of understand and help recover from a lot of things.
Exactly. So let's go into the third question, and that is, what gave you the incentive to bring mental health awareness and education to your BookTube channel? Because when you take a look at the BookTube community, what do you see? You see TBRs, you see book reviews, you see all of these readathons, and it's almost always the same couple of books, because obviously when big influential names in BookTube feature a certain book, the crowd wants to follow. They say, well, if this person thinks that book is good, they want to read that book and probably do the exact same thing that original creator did, because they want to bring their own perspective. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I always say that if I saw 50 people review the latest movie, like I'll take an example, Parasite, which is a fantastic film, I will watch all 50 of those reviews because I know I'm going to gain a little something different from each and every one of them. But when a creator like yourself decides to go a little bit outside the box, like you're still talking about books, but you want to bring a little something extra to the table. So how did you feel about doing that? And did you feel that it was going to be something that would, you know, have the viewership bring the right kind of attitude about it? Like, do you think that it was going to help people be a little bit more aware of it, about mental health? Like, how did you feel when you decided that you wanted to bring these kinds of topics to your channel?
Yeah, so part of it is definitely that I am very passionate about, mental health awareness, about, destigmatizing a lot of things, about normalizing a lot of things that people experience. And so I definitely wanted to bring that as far as, one from an empathy perspective, right? I wanted to I think a lot of people on social media are very empathetic and very well intentioned, but I also see there's this other side to social media, particularly YouTube, where people can be quite callous and cruel, or they can unintentionally be kind of harmful. And so I kind of wanted to counter that in my own way. And so that was part of it. And then I also, I think in a big way, it's kind of inevitable for me to bring that perspective because that is the lens through which I see the world, if you want to say it like that. So I don't think I could possibly create a booktube channel without bringing that perspective because it's such a large part of who I am as a person. But then also interestingly, I started my booktube channel in large part for my own kind of mental health development and growth because I, for most of my life, have been a quite, introverted, kind of shy, but really anxious person. And so public speaking, which to me meant anybody other than like one person in the room that I know really well, that was terrifying to me. And it was debilitating to the point where like I couldn't speak at all. I would shake, I would stutter. It was really awful. And what we know from psychology and research is that avoidance of those kinds of fears is what kind of perpetuates that and maintains that fear. And so I said, you know what? I'm tired of not being able to speak to people. I'm tired of not being able to share an opinion about things. So I can bring valuable, hopefully valuable information to the table and also help myself kind of come out of that and develop out of that. So,
Yeah, that's definitely an attitude that a lot of people have when they're creating their channels. I mean, I definitely had those exact same feelings because I was always an opinionated person. I always had things to say about things that I loved. And that's the other thing. You mentioned that this is a passion of yours. And that's, I think, what draws people to channels like yourself, because when people see someone talking about something, regardless of whether that viewer knows a lot about it or doesn't know a thing about it, if the passion is there from that content creator, that truly sparks interest. I'll throw out my usual joke that I say. It's like if I see a channel whose topic is underwater basket weaving. Now, I don't have any intention of doing that, but if that person is coming at me with passion and is telling me that underwater basket weaving is just so damn awesome, that energy and that positivity, I will watch that just because I appreciate the voice. I appreciate the presence. And that's also one of the reasons why I started watching your channel, because you brought that passion about that. And the other thing that I think was pretty much what slated me as a subscriber for you, and I was like very happy that I made that choice because, I will watch some YouTubers over time and then I just will stop watching them and unsubscribe. But I still remember that one day where I don't even think that video is even on your channel anymore, but there was a day where you were actually talking about what you wanted to do with your channel moving forward. And you specifically said that you wanted to connect with certain people on a deeper level if they were willing. So the fact that you were reaching out to the people that were watching saying, I would like to learn a little bit more about the people who are watching me. And that's something that I always say. I like to get comments from my subscribers because I want to talk to these people. I want to see what makes them tick. I think what's great is the fact that we are an opinionated group here on this platform. And like you said, yes, there are some people that can be very callous and cruel, especially when there is disagreement on various opinions involved. And trust me, there are some days where I see comments based on movies that I review that I don't like, and my God, do some people come down with like the wrath of 1,000 suns. But there are some people that will leave me a comment that even though there's such disagreement, there is so much of a passion there to say, here's what you're missing. They're trying to engage with me. They're trying to steer the ship in their favor, if you will. So the fact that there are some people that are willing to do that kind of engagement gives me more of an incentive to talk to those people, get an understanding, and maybe try to find a mutual common ground. And that's what's great. We need more people like that here.
Yeah, I agree. I think if there's a respectful disagreement, I love that. I love when people are just as passionate about something as I am, even if that's the opposite perspective. And in some ways, that's even more fun, right? Because then it's more challenging. Then you have to think about it from a different way. And you always take away, if you're really engaging with that in an open way, you always gain something from it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the other thing about the comments is the fact that because there is anonymity, that's where a lot of people really show that they don't necessarily have a filter. But the funny thing is, like, when someone brings me that passion and I know I can engage with that person, so when I actually leave a comment in response and it's not a hurtful comment, like, I will not lie that there are just some days where someone leaves me a very hurtful comment and I'll just zap them right back just because I can. But that's a rarity for me. But when I actually respond to someone's comment, I am always saying to myself, I wonder what that person's going to respond back to me. Maybe we can actually have an engaging conversation. And what's also very interesting is sometimes I've actually gone to that point where people actually in the end respected my views and even sometimes would even subscribe to my channel because they appreciated that. And later on, they'll actually see something that I do that they actually totally agree with. So they're saying, oh, this person's not so bad after all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's the important thing is at the end of the day, kind of getting ourselves to remember that we don't have to agree on everything to, at the end of the day, be able to relate to one another and see the value in one another. And I think that that's a really good thing to promote, both, you know, outwardly and also inwardly within yourself to be able to look at other people in that way.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the fourth question is going to be about your thoughts on YouTube and other kinds of social media as a tool that coincides well with mental health. Now, do you think that these are tools that can help people understand mental health more for the purposes of coping? If someone actually does have a situation and is using YouTube as a platform, like, is it something that is really going to be used as a positive, like to cope with it, to educate themselves, and also see other kinds of perspectives on specific mental health situations? Or is it possible that it could lead more to a judgmental atmosphere with negative effects? Because we just recently said that, you know, people will come at you with opinions and you will also bring your own opinions to the table. And some people can be very understanding, willing to engage, but like you said, some other people can come off pretty cruel. So on the concept of mental health, because look, I know it, you know it, the four winds know it. It's a hot button topic right now. It's a very big topic of discussion. And especially considering the fact that there are lots of people who are content creators and who are actual viewers of this content. Some of these people do have mental health issues. So is it a positive tool or is it a negative tool?
I think it's both, which is kind of like a cop-out answer, but it's to me, the most accurate one.
You're right.
And it's such a complex question to even approach because there's so many facets to that. So I'll try to answer it as best as I can. I think that first of all, everybody's social media experience is different, right? Because whether that be the algorithms of things that are promoted to us and the things that we seek out, and then the people that we meet through that. And so everybody's experience potentially can be very, very different. So I think a lot of it is kind of the little niche that you end up in can really affect whether it's more positive or more negative.
Mhm.
Um, but I think that there's a lot of good stuff out there. There's a lot of awareness, right? There's a lot of people saying, hey, this is a thing that I experience. And do you experience? I want to hear about your experiences. And I think that's a really great way to destigmatize a lot of, whether it be mental illness or symptoms or just kind of regular life struggles. And it's also a way to normalize things for a lot of people. That's one of the main reasons that I think the first book review that I did on my channel was for this book called The Body Keeps the Score. And the main reason why I did that book review so in depth, even though I was so anxious about it, was because that book for me normalized something that I had been experiencing that I had no clue that other people felt or experienced. And that's even with my years of, training and research and learning about psychology. And so I couldn't help but feel like, oh, I have to bring this information out to people because there might be other people who they feel this too and they don't know, and it'll help them. And sure enough, on that video, it really touched my heart every single time somebody said like, wow, this video really impacted me because I feel this too, and I didn't know that other people. And so that, to me, that was a really beautiful moment of almost catharsis for me. I really love that. And I see that in other people's content. I see people putting themselves out there very genuinely, whether that be with their own personal experiences or with things that they've learned to help others. Conversely, I also think that there's a lot of bad things that can come from social media. There's a lot of misinformation, even sometimes well-intentioned misinformation. And there's a lot of I never want to invalidate anybody's anecdotal experience with something like a mental illness or something like that. But I think one thing that I find quite frequently in my little sub niche of YouTube is people who kind of generalize their personal experience with something to the whole world. So kind of like if I have anxiety and I experience it this way, if somebody else experiences it a different way and puts it out there, I've seen a lot of people like kind of argue that and invalidate the other person's experience and say that's not true or they're lying or and to me that's kind of the more toxic side of things. But
Yeah, because unfortunately, and maybe this is human nature, but the whole concept of painting with a broad brush, that's always the most dangerous thing because, this is always something that floats around in my head. So the fact that I'm actually bringing this to you, maybe you can let me know if this is the right way to tackle it, because one of the few things that always upsets me is I know that there's lots of different mental health situations out there. It's so unexplored right now, and I'm just glad to know that we're at least trying to explore this territory. When someone just sees an opinion that they don't like, they say they're triggered and they say like, you're affecting my mental health. So my question that always circles my mind is this person truly suffering from a situation, or is this person just saying that because they just don't like what that other person said? Do you know what I mean? It's just because of the fact that we're living in a world right now where we're so divided in regards to our opinions. And unfortunately, the worst topic to bring up these days is politics, regardless of where you fall on that spectrum. But people will unfortunately bring in other elements for the sake of shooting the other person down. And what I always say is, I don't think that that's right, because I know that there are people that really are suffering from these problems. And what these specific people, and I also want to make it clear, it's not a ton, it's a small group, but unfortunately, these small groups always have the loudest voice. And I feel that because they're doing this, because they know that they can, they're making the people who are truly suffering with these conditions, it's making their case moot and insignificant. And I, for one, am not happy about that. So before you answer, did I say it right?
Yeah, I think you know, you're definitely using language that's very sensitive and aware, and so I think that that's a great starting point. That's more than
Thank you.
some people do. You're welcome. And I think that there's a lot packed into that question. So if I stray off topic or I'm not answering what you want, cut in and let me know. But so you brought up a couple of very interesting points. How I tend to interact with people, if they tell me that they are suffering from something or that they are diagnosed with a mental illness or something, I tend to fall on the side of, I'll believe you, because it's not my place to decide whether or not you're telling the truth or you're lying to me. I could not possibly know that, especially not online. And so, you know, it does no good for me to decide I believe you or not. For this purpose of conversation, I'll have to take that face value. At the same time, I do see what you're saying about the kind of misrepresentation of certain mental illnesses. That's something that I do sometimes find frustrating, and a lot of people in the who work in the mental health community find frustrating. So, for example, so there are some mental illnesses that are kind of more popular than others, or more normalized than others. So things like depression and anxiety are very talked about and not really stigmatized as much as they used to be, right?
Yeah.
And that's an amazing thing. But sometimes what ends up happening is that because these words are thrown out there so much more and they're talked about more, a lot of times people kind of conflate clinical depression with feeling sadness, or they conflate clinical anxiety with feelings of anxiety. And they will sometimes talk about their feelings of anxiety or feelings of sadness as though it's the same thing as clinical anxiety or clinical depression. And so that is frustrating, because you're right, what that does end up doing is that kind of really takes away from the very real and difficult experiences of people who are diagnosed with these mental illnesses and are going through them. You know, if I feel you know, mildly anxious before I perform a solo, that's normal anxiety. That's part of human functioning, and that's normal. And that's not to say it's not distressing. It is. But that's not the same thing as somebody who has a chronic anxiety disorder, who, like, let's say, like generalized anxiety disorder, where so much of their day is spent just in this tense state of constant fear and anxiety. It's not the same thing. And so I think that we really need to be careful with our word choice. And with that, you use something that I'm really glad you brought up, which is the triggering thing.
Yeah.
So I think we do need to be sensitive to other people's boundaries, not just physical, but, you know, conversational. If things are upsetting to somebody, we should be aware of that and try our best to, you know, not upset them. At the same time, triggers are very interesting because according to the research that I am familiar with and that I have seen, there's actually a lot of evidence to suggest that constantly giving trigger warnings is actually counterproductive and can make a person more hyper-aroused or like physically tense and more anxious about the topic that's being talked about than if you just talked about it. Because the moment you say that, it's basically like telling the other person, okay, I have to be anxious about this now. It's coming, it's coming, it's coming. Whereas if they just hear it in conversation, there might be a bit of a anxious reaction, but then it will probably dissipate because you're then listening to their new information and their anxiety is dying down. Of course, that's not always true. People who have genuine, I don't want to say that, I'm not trying to say that other people's triggers aren't genuine, but people who have maybe more extreme or more sensitive triggers, they haven't maybe processed through different traumas, you know, it definitely can be that discomforting and that severe, where just hearing about something can be enough to you know, really be upsetting and distressing. But I do think that the word trigger and in the way that we handle triggers is definitely maybe not as wise as we often kind of think it is in social media. Yeah.
Yeah, that's I'm really, you're giving me so many things to think about and actually add a little bit more perspective to it, because one of the few things that I didn't actually know was the whole origin of the actual phrase trigger warning. My wife actually told me that trigger warning actually originated with veterans and PTSD, because that was where because originally, obviously, the original name of that whole situation was originally called shell shock, dating all the way back to World War I. But it was triggering was something that originated with the veterans, especially from World War II and the Vietnam War, because they were always because a lot of these soldiers, they saw horrible things. I mean, I never sat down with my grandfather, who actually stormed the beaches of Normandy, to ever really talk about his war stories, but he was a science teacher, so we actually talked about cool things like dinosaurs and stuff like that. One of my fondest memories was he and I watching Jurassic Park together, and he just loved how much I was interested in the science of genetics and not just the whole concept of dinosaurs walking around. But I never talked to him about it, and I never would have. And luckily, there are soldiers from war that actually have been fortunate not to deal with those types of things, but it wasn't necessarily something that I actually talked about. One of the things I do agree with you on is you've got to take something at face value, especially if it's going to be a stranger. It's like when I'm talking with a friend of mine and that friend of mine tries to use something like that as an excuse, I'm like, buddy, I know you. You will be flipping your mouth off like a sailor and like talking extremely crazy and offensive and gross 1 second, but the minute that one little thing that bothers you causes you to go up in an upheaval, there are people that have it a lot worse than you, and I don't agree with what you're displaying with me right now. So I agree with you in regards to a stranger dealing with these kinds of things or saying something like that. You have to take that with a grain. You have to be a little bit more open-minded, because you don't know this person. You do not know this person's life. Also, you also brought up depression and anxiety, which is also, like you said, something that we're really hearing a lot more about, things that we're actually trying to find solutions for, because you also mentioned yourself getting up and talking about things in a public forum. That had a name called stage fright. And Jerry Seinfeld once actually has a joke in his routine. The worst fear amongst the human race is public speaking, and number 2 is death. So he says, I would rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy. So that's something that is like affecting so many people. But yes, there are people that have anxiety that is a lot more complicated. It's a lot more difficult for them. And you're right, depression is something else. Like, there's a very big difference from actually just being upset about something or truly having a serious issue. Like depression, as far as what I have learned, because when I go to the doctor now for a physical, they ask me, how are you feeling? They're like saying, if you have like these passions of yours and you're just not really finding any happiness in that anymore, that could be a serious case of depression, because things that make you happy shouldn't make you upset. So that's one of the simplest ways that people will talk about what really is classified as depression. And another interesting thing that I actually didn't realize when I was younger, but a lot of people that I knew, especially going into my 20s, a lot of my friends were actually going to see therapists. And I didn't actually know that that was something that was becoming a lot more embraced in the society than it used to be. I mean, my parents never wanted me to go to a therapist, but because, and quite frankly, I sort of have a personal fear about going to sit down with a therapist, because I try to make it lighthearted when it comes to talking with my friends. I always say that if I go to a therapist, I'm going to find out that I am not well, and I'm going to be put on 10 different kinds of medication, and I'm going to feel very upset about myself. But of course, that's not me trying to be offensive to people who actually have these problems. It's just like, I truthfully feel that when there's something that's truly getting me down, yes, it's good to talk about it. Some people say talking with a therapist is better than talking with friends or family members, because there is less bias. Because when there's someone that has an unbiased opinion, you might be pointing in the right direction, which is kind of one of the main reasons why one of my saving graces when it comes to some of my problems I talk to my friends on YouTube, because even though they are still my friends, they still don't know me as well as someone like my very best friend that I've had since I was 4 years old, or my sister, or my mother, or even my wife. Like, sometimes you do need that outlet from that person who doesn't necessarily know you inside and out, because that person is going to really come at your situation with an open mind and give you a better perspective.
Yeah, well, and there's also less ties to you. So first I want to go back to earlier, and I'm not saying that you are supporting this idea, but I just want to clarify. I think one of the biggest misconceptions about therapy that prevents a lot of people from seeking out therapy is that there's this idea that, oh, if I go to therapy, something must be wrong with me, or there's only people who have something wrong with them go to therapy. And I think that that's part of that stigma that, oh, I don't need a therapist. I don't need to go to a therapist. It's not. And that's one thing
Yeah.
that I hope, gets better over time. But also the interesting thing with like a therapist, it's not only, yes, that they tend to have a more objective opinion, but they're also in a better place to tell you these things objectively than a family or a friend. Because when we're talking to people within our close-knit social circles, whether we acknowledge it or not, there's a lot of rules and norms and things that we do or we don't do. And so if in my social group, maybe you're struggling with something, but in our social group we don't talk about that, we don't say that. Well, then even if I notice it, I might not feel like I can say it. Whereas a therapist, not only are they objective, but they don't have those same kind of ties. They can kind of feel a little bit more able to kind of look into it and explore it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's not just with professionals that help people with the mind. I mean, I have been diagnosed in the past with some physical issues. Like, I remember when I was put on a medication because I had an issue with my cholesterol. I am not ashamed to say that I actually am currently living with 2 hernias. And when you hear that from your doctor, it's like I'm sitting on by myself, and I just feel like I'm broken. Like I feel better when I know I'm 100%. But you're absolutely right. I mean, even when it comes to just sitting down with someone like a therapist, there still is a little bit of stigma. Like you said, obviously I was living proof. Like, I was afraid to go because I was afraid to get diagnosed with something. But I do still know that there is value with people in that profession, because people do need people to talk to sometimes, not necessarily people that are close knit. Every example that you gave is everything that I agree with. I just want to let you know that. So we'll go into the fifth question, and that is, what do you feel are the pressures of discussion of mental health, especially when it comes to things like using social media platforms? Examples like authors who write about mental health issues with characters with those specific issues, as well as readers and watchers that may have different ways of interpreting those specific kinds of mental health situations. Bluntly, just for everybody else, it's like an author will write about a character with a mental health situation. Now, what about those people who are reading that may actually have that mental situation, and they will interpret it basically saying, did the author get it right, or did the author get it wrong? That's the easiest way that I can try and explain this question.
Yeah, and in some ways that touches on that whole idea that I mentioned earlier, where people can sometimes kind of hold their personal experience with something as the standard and generalize that to everybody. So everybody who has depression looks like this. I see that a lot, and I'm really into fitness, right? I'm trying to get more healthy or whatever. So for a while, I was watching a lot of fitness things on YouTube. And because of this, YouTube was recommending me all these different, even loosely related fitness channels, as YouTube does. And because of this, I came across a couple of women who have channels. These women are obese, and they're trying to lose weight. And in their videos, they talk about how they've been diagnosed with eating disorders and how they have food addictions. And it seems very clear to me from watching their videos that they're being honest. And even if it wasn't clear to me, again, that goes to that face value thing. I'm going to take them at their word. It's not my place to say whether or not they do or don't. And I would see so many comments in the comment section, you know, saying, oh, she's lying. She's a narcissist. She's lying because I have this and this is what I do. Or, oh, this person is just manipulating you. We need to, you know, like shaming this person because their version of their eating disorder, how they're, you know, showing their eating disorder didn't match up with what they personally had. And I think that we as people need to be really, really cautious in making sure that we're not neglecting, negating, or shaming people for having experiences that are different from ours. And we need to be open to the fact that just because we've been through something doesn't mean that that's how everybody else experiences that, right?
Mm-hmm.
As content creators, I think we have to be very aware, whether that's, you know, being an author, being a YouTube creator, we have to make sure that if we're going to be talking about a subject, we have to make sure that we're getting good information about it, right? Because why else make content with that information? That's what does that really benefit? Why are we doing that? And I think it's important too to check our motivations, right? Like, why do I want to write this book with this character? You know, and I think we have to check to make sure that we're not kind of being exploitative, or we're not being, you know, I'm not writing about this person just because I see that it's a way for me to get attention, get likes on my video, or to get money from selling this book, but that we have a genuine interest in the topic and serving that interest well. And so with that, I think that that's where that whole own voices comes in, you know, if not promoting other people who actually have, whoever who identify with whatever group it is that you're writing about or making content about, promoting those people and also incorporating them into your own art, I think is really important to make a really sensitive and aware. And then really quick, as far as like consumers, I think we have to be really critical consumers of information. Whether that be me as a reader, me as somebody watching YouTube, we have to be aware of maybe the limitations of this person's content. We need to be aware of maybe their own biases and their own blind spots. And we need to be aware of, you know, maybe what parts of the story are missing, and just be kind of critical, not critical as in like mean, of course, it doesn't mean the same thing, but sometimes it gets confused. But just critical consumers of whatever it is that we're watching or reading.
Yeah, you definitely brought up a couple of talking points that I hope that I can get out as best as I can. I mean, one of the few things, it actually flows into the next question because, I might as well just throw the question out and I'll just continue my topic of thought and then we'll continue on, because one of the things that definitely holds us back sometimes in regards to the understanding various mental health conditions is possible roadblocks. And we already mentioned trigger warnings, but one of the other major phrases that we see, especially in the community, whether it's YouTube or just in entertainment in general, is cancel culture. And you've mentioned a whole bunch of things. When you talk about things like diverse books and stuff like that, I still remember when I first learned about that, the topic of Sarah J. Maas. Like, she started writing her court series and she got criticized because she didn't have any diverse characters in her book. And then in A Court of Wings and Ruin, she makes a whole bunch of diverse characters and people were saying, oh, but you're too little too late now. And that's one of the few things that makes me a little bit curious about where we're going right now as a society, because it's like, clearly something like mental health is a topic that people are still learning about. And you're right, it's not about it shouldn't be about the monetary consumption. It should be about the willingness to grow and the willingness to learn. But the problem is when someone is putting an idea out there, because you see, it's very difficult for someone who may not have a mental health situation incorporate mental health topics into their work because they don't know much about it. And researching it is a very time-consuming process. And unfortunately, when it comes to something like making a movie or writing a book, you've got a deadline, and you want to be accurate as you possibly can, but you're not necessarily going to get it right the first time. And the fact that there are people who will see these mistakes and inadequacies and basically say, you're a bad person, you're wrong, you shouldn't be acknowledged anymore, that doesn't necessarily help the situation. How is someone supposed to learn when you're not getting constructive criticism, rather you're getting stamped out, and basically the masses are being told to ignore you because you have no idea what you're talking about. So I really feel at this time there's a sort of a double-edged sword, if you will. There's the people that don't know anything about it, that want to learn about it, but then there's people who know so much about it because of their own personal situations, and even that can be a fault because that person may have a mental health situation, but that person is not a professional in mental health research. So it's just throwing more fuel on the so-called dumpster fire. And that's not necessarily a healthy thing, because if there's people who are willing to learn, but there are certain people that don't want to let these people in because they don't understand it, then how are we going to move forward and learn and develop more of an understanding?
Yeah, and I think you bring up a number of good points. At the end of the day, I think it's really about being empathic, being mindful, and being aware. And so I think, first of all, about the author situation, I see your argument. For me, I would argue that if you're an author and you're going to write a book about a topic, it is your duty to research that well. And if you don't have time to do it within, pick a different topic. Especially, I mean, and the other thing too is not all mistakes are equal, right? Like if somebody's writing a book about a character who has depression and maybe they forget about a couple of symptoms that would have to be required to be diagnosed with depression, that's not a horrible mistake, right? That doesn't really impact anybody. However, one common thing that a lot of people, more so in movies than books, at least in my experience, but I'm sure there are a lot of books like this that I don't know about, but it's that a lot of times people with mental illness are depicted as the crazy ones, like crazy as in like they're violent, they're evil, they're so out of touch with reality that they're harmful to everybody, and that is a really dangerous thing. So if somebody's writing a book with that kind of promoting that idea that people with mental illness are dangerous and that they're that I think is a much bigger mistake than the previous one I mentioned. So they're not all on equal footing. And so I do understand what you mean in some sense. Like if somebody makes a small mistake, it doesn't really do any good to harass them and make assumptions about their character or their intent or who they are as a person and their value. So that is hard. And so I think that people who tend to be the kind of like cancel type of people, I think it would benefit them and others to kind of reflect on that a little bit and see like why really is this upsetting to them? Is it really worth is the punishment that I'm giving really worth their action? Does it match up? But then I also think too, whether it's deserved or not, I do think that we have to be kind of aware of other people's perspective because I might write a book about something and I think, and I don't identify with this group and I think that I've done a great job. But if a bunch of people are telling me if a bunch of people who identify with whatever group I wrote about in my book, if a bunch of them are telling me, no, this is not okay and here's why, I do think I should also be open to that information. I think it's better if we kept the criticism on people's actions instead of people as human beings, because the truth of the matter is we all make mistakes. And in fact, for me, I feel that I'm a year into my master's program in psychology, and I think it's fair to say that I know more about the topic than most people, not most than anybody in the world. There are people with PhDs or people who have been practicing for years and know so much more than me. But even so, even with this kind of knowledge, I often feel scared to talk about it online because I know that if I say something the wrong way, use the wrong word, or don't fully explain all the context of something and somebody makes an assumption about what I mean, then that can be brought out of proportion now and people, cancel me as a person. Or years from now, maybe, new research comes up and I find out that something I said in a video was wrong and somebody, retweets my video from like 10 years ago and says, oh, this girl is so wrong, And so I think that's the part that's really the toxic part of the cancel culture that you're talking about, is when you make people so scared to say anything or to ask questions about things that they don't understand, or to say, hey, here's my understanding about this. Is that true? Then no growth comes from that. And really, it's kind of counterproductive to the goal, right? If we want people to grow and learn and we want to promote information, then we have to be willing to accept that people have bad information. And instead of telling them, hey, you're a bad person and you cannot be redeemed from this mistake that you made, here, I think what you said was really upsetting and really just wrong. I want to tell you why, and I want us to have a conversation because I want you to know why this matters to me. And it's not, and it's not even necessarily always about, oh, I want to help you. It's even as a strategy, it's more productive for me too in the cause that I'm concerned about. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do. And you're absolutely right. I think another one of the biggest pitfalls here, especially when it comes to people voicing opinions on what other people say, is that a comment on a social media platform, it doesn't speak volumes as it should, because it's just words on the internet. And it's like I always say to someone, if you're going to have a conversation with me, don't do it via text. Call me. Let's talk. Because words can be looked at on a page and there's no emotion attached to them. You can't tell what that person is feeling based on those words that you're reading. So, of course, something can be taken completely out of context when you're just looking at the written word. That's why people really need to engage more. I mean, I think one of the funniest things about social media until the COVID-19 pandemic hit is the more people were using social media, the more unsocial they were becoming. So the fact that we're now actually using social media for its actual purposes, I think we're finally starting to get back together as people. We're starting to communicate better, understand each other more. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And also, things in regards to any type of topic are going to change. They're going to evolve because we're going to learn more stuff. I think that when someone goes and sees a video that you made from 10 years ago where the whole perspective of that specific content, first of all, if that person doesn't realize that you said that 10 years ago and doesn't understand what the situation was like 10 years ago, then that person is just ignorant in his or herself. I mean, people hate when someone brings up the famous line, because those were the times. It's like people need to understand that we are still growing as people. I mean, we have to understand that when John Wayne's Time magazine article that was uncovered that he did like in the late 1960s, that apparently he was an extremely racist person, well, there were a lot of extremely ignorant people in the public eye at that time, because we have to remember that in the 1960s, we had literally just made advances in the civil rights movement in the early 1960s. So there was still so many barriers up, and people need to understand that that was a different time. It's still wrong. I want to make that clear. It's still wrong, but we are so different today than when we were about 50 years ago. And we need to understand that. And at the same time, we need these things to still be exposed and still be relevant, because the whole argument that a lot of people have, once again, going back to politics, is if we rewrite history and don't preserve it, we're not going to advance, because we have to remember where we were to understand where we are going. If we don't know that there were some bad, very, very bad things that we as a society, especially in America, in a free world, in less than 100 years, we were still in a very negative place. We need to learn and we need to understand those specific things, because it's only going to help us all learn more and continue to shape our society in a positive way. We have to know these things. We really do.
Yeah, and to be fair, I think, and I assume that you probably meant this, the whole like argument of, oh, these are the times, I do see your point, but I think that there are some things that regardless of the times, it's just kind of bad and we don't have to make
yeah, absolutely.
But I do get what you mean. We are constantly growing as individuals, as societies, as cultures. And I think that what a lot of people maybe don't think about is that there are going to be things 50 years from now that we see is so clearly, you know, inappropriate or immoral that we're doing now and don't really think about as much. And people in 50 years are going to be like, how could they not know that? But that's something, there's this interesting component in psychology. It's called the hindsight bias. And that's like when you, it's the whole, you know, hindsight is 2020.
It's always 2020, yeah.
In the future, you can look back with more information and say, wow, that was really not so good. But when you're in the moment, it doesn't justify what you're doing by any means. But you're also forgetting that in the moment, there's a lot of different things that factor into that. And so, yeah, well, there are some things that no matter what time it is, it's bad. There are also other things that it is part of the time in the culture and the people, you know. Again, be mindful, be open to different ideas and genuinely open. Like some people, they think being open means like, oh yeah, I hear you, but I disagree. You don't have to agree to be open, but I think you definitely have to play with the idea in your mind, toy with it, make arguments against it and for it, and really kind of consider that idea before you just throw it out. Especially if, like I said, if it's something like where a lot of people are coming to you and saying, hey, this isn't good, this isn't right, here's why. I think it's really important for us to be open to it.
And you see the response that you just gave me is exactly what I want to see more of in this community. The fact that I said something and you took what I said and you wanted to clarify it. You wanted to get a better understanding of exactly what I was saying to make sure that that was where I was going, because there are other people out there that will have heard that statement and say, oh, that person is ignorant. That person has no idea about the true situation. He or she does not know my life. The fact that you wanted to make sure that what I was saying was what you were hoping that I was saying or expecting what I was saying, that's a very respectable thing. And that's one of the few things that I feel is the only way that we're going to be able to take down these walls and really get better understandings of all of these specific kind of situations, whether it's a mental health situation, whether it's a race relation situation, sexual identity situation. We have to really look at each and every individual person and really get an understanding of what that person is trying to say, rather than what I think this is what this person is saying.
I don't necessarily expect everybody to live up to this I guess philosophy, because it's my personal thing, but I have found that it's much better to assume people have good intentions than to assume that they have bad intentions, because what I find is that most frequently they do have good intentions. And even if maybe it's that they misspoke, or maybe it's that they have misinformation. Either way, if I go into the conversation assuming they have good intentions, we can come out better from the discussion than if I just, you know, assume that they're trying to say something mean or hurt me or other people.
Right. So this will bring up the final question, and that is, as someone who is going to be continuing to grow in the field of psychology, what do you feel are some of the ways that professionals and even average people will understand mental health moving forward into the future?
Yeah, that's a great question.
That's an opinion piece. That's what that is. It's really your own personal thoughts, so it doesn't have to necessarily have to be accurate.
Yeah, I hope that we really start to see mental health in a more holistic manner, both in kind of a systematic way and as far as like a health way. So what that means is I hope that we start to see mental health as a part of physical health. Right now we see them as sort of two separate identities, which they're really not. They're very intermingled, right? Your mental health affects your physical health affects your mental health, and it's part of this system that works together. And when we neglect one, the whole system isn't going to function as well. And with that kind of holistic approach, I hope that we start to understand that more preventative measures can be put into place, right? Just like with physical health, we can, you know, I can start, you know, I can start better before my cholesterol is high. I can start putting things in place mentally, mental practices, things that I do in my life to also help prevent the likelihood of me developing, you know, mental illness or something like that. And so I think we really need to do that by, this is kind of going into the systematic part of really putting resources and education into the communities that are most vulnerable. Also into, when we think of it from a developmental perspective, we know that children are particularly vulnerable between the first 1 and 3 years. So helping mothers with different resources that they may need, whether that's financial, whether that's mental health for their own sake, as they're having children, whether that's mental health services for children. I really think that there's a huge need for preventative measures in support into the community that would really help.
Yeah, I mean, one of the few things that I once heard from someone was, don't come to me with a problem unless you have a solution. And that's one of the few things that I feel is holding us all as individuals back from understanding mental health. It's just because of the fact that while there is a lot of research right now that's going into it, when it comes to the average person getting exposed to the topic of mental health, it's always, here's this person, and this person has this situation, or sometimes they use this extreme. Here's this person who has this problem. I'm like, okay, this person has the situation, but what are we doing to fix? What are we doing to get this person who has this mental condition or this mental situation? How are we getting this person to be more confident? How are we getting help for this person? How is this person joining society and being treated as an equal and not necessarily someone that is different, which could lead to things like alienation and also to possible things like anxiety? I mean, I hope you understand what I'm trying to explain. I'm just hoping that, like I said earlier before we even went on the air, if there was ever a day where I can know where my tax dollars would go to, I would want it to go to mental health, because I know that there's a lot of people who have various conditions or various situations that I feel they're not getting much help on, because I still feel there's so much more that we can learn. But the thing that I get really upset about is the fact that we only know that these people have said situations, but there doesn't really seem to be a little bit more exposure on how we're going about trying to help them. Does that make any sense?
It does, and I think your question kind of points out something within, the psychology community that academics and researchers are trying to address, and that's that, we have a lot of research, but even though a lot of research is funded by grant money, research isn't typically given back to the communities that fund it, right? The information isn't really given back. And that's really, unfortunate. And so they are trying to fix that. They're trying to make more, research articles that are available for free to the public. But even so, that's not really accessible always either, because just because the research is there doesn't mean that people might be familiar with the verbiage or what the research article means. I know that if I read a research article, like the COVID-19 thing is a perfect example. I tried to read the research article and it's like a migraine. I'm like, I have no idea what it's saying. I don't really, And so I think the main thing is that you're right. I think that people in the field need to work harder and advocate harder to make this information available to the public, and also advocate harder at a political level. And I don't mean to, I hope I don't say anything that, offends you politically, but to me, I am a very, very passionate person about political advocacy. And in fact, that's something I really want to get into, is that we need people who are familiar with the field, familiar with the problems, going in and fighting and representing people in the communities that need help. So one of the biggest things in mental health that we're aware of is that the most vulnerable communities, the communities that are more likely to have people who develop, different mental illnesses or different mental health issues, are the very communities that get the least amount of help and that are most often not valued on a political scale. And so we need people being willing to go in and, fight for them, as far as I'm concerned. I feel like I got distracted from the question. action, but
No, you didn't. I mean, I always say actions speak louder than words, and that's one of the few things that really upsets me from a political standpoint, because there are all of these political figures that are all talk and no action. Like, they say, yes, we're on your side, but where are the results? And that's one of the few things that I truthfully feel needs to change. I don't care if it's red or blue, Democrat, Republican. It's just like, at this point in time, I seriously feel that we are in dire need of some truly good and honest people who are willing to provide results in regards to what they stand for, because we have been going through life for decades with so many people saying, oh, we're going to work on this and we're going to work on that and that and that, and nothing ever happened. It's like, as a New Yorker, oh yeah, we're gonna fix the subway system. What's changed? Oh, you just built a new station and a new train. That definitely helped. You see what I mean? That's what I'm definitely hoping for. But I think that that's pretty much gonna wrap everything up. And I just want to say to you, Tiffany, thank you very much for joining me today. This was a wonderful conversation, and I really hope that this encourages you as a content creator to pull down some of your own barriers and be a little more excited to talk more about these things. Because look, I don't want to be insulting, but that's one of the main reasons why I came to your channel, and you talked about it, but I'm still waiting for a little bit more. So I hope that we will get some more action from you on these topics, because I truthfully believe that you can be a guiding light, hopefully one of many, to help us move forward into the future with mental health awareness, and hopefully the future will be a positive place for everyone.
yes, I agree. And we can each do our individual part to make that happen. But
Absolutely. Absolutely. But everybody, I want to thank you all for joining us today for this wonderful Sunday sit down. And I'm hoping that you will be looking forward to seeing another great topic next month here. But more importantly, as always, another great YouTuber to discuss it with. I will see you in the next one, everyone. Hey, thank you so much for stopping by my channel today. If you're new here and want to see more of what my channel has to offer, please click on the link to my last video, or hit that subscribe button to be kept up to date with all of my uploads. Content of all sorts is posted here quite often, so trust me, you do not want to fall behind. I will see you in the comments, and actions speak louder than words.